Hi, and welcome to Meetings in Math. You are here for 6.58% of increase and decrease. Our essential question is, how can I solve problems involving percents of increase or decrease? Today you will need your Jaguar Jots on section 6.5a, a pen or a pencil. You might find a highlighter helpful. A calculator may keep things moving along quickly. Your self-confidence and your determination, and always bring your problem-solving skills. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to look at is this table of teams and their points. And here are the scores for the last two games in three different teams. The football team scored 22 points in the first game and 30 points in their next game. The basketball team scored 100 points in the first game and 108 points in their next game. And the baseball team scored 4 points in the first game and 12 points in their next game. And what are some of the things that we notice? Well, the first thing that I noticed is they all increased. They all did better. And then the next thing that I noticed is that they all increased by 8. So knowing that they all increased by 8, can I tell you which one improved the most and why? And at that, I kind of step back and I go, yeah, I don't think I can. Because football teams, when they make a touchdown, don't just get 1 point, they get more than 1 point. And a basketball team, when they shoot a basket, just a normal one, they don't just get 1 point, they get more than 1 point. And baseball teams, when they score a run, they only get 1. So for everybody getting a thing, it's different points. And so it's hard to tell who's actually improving because it doesn't make sense, because a point doesn't mean the same thing for each game. So how should we compare? Well, that's where percentages come in. We can compare using percentages. What this does is it evens the playing ground, and it basically treats everything the same. So it makes them all worth 100 points. So it levels the ground so that everything's talking about the same amount. So now we can start looking at, and I figure out, well, what was that percent of increase? How much did they increase as a percent? My 8 points is a percentage of how much. So really, how much was an 8-point increase when I started with 22 points? Well, if I just stop and I think about an 8-point increase out of my 22 points is 0.36 and just keeps repeating. So if I change that then into a percentage, I end up with 36.36%. But what does it mean when I talk about the basketball team? Well, the basketball team had an 8-point increase when they started with 100 points. That's a nice one. I can do that one. That was an 8% increase. So their 8 points does not look nearly the same as the football team. It's not nearly as close. So right now, the basketball team seems to have a less improvement over the football team. The football team's improving more so than the basketball team. But let's now take a look at the baseball team. The baseball score went from a 4 to a 12. If we look at that, that's a very big gap. So they started off with only 4 points. So if we increased to an 8 points over 4 points, well, that is 2. So if we made that into a percent, so 2 and then percent, that's a 200% increase. So if we just take all of our percents and we look at them, a 36.36% increase, an 8% increase, or a 200% increase, who improved the most and why? And so the baseball team had a 200% increase in points, while the football team only had a 36.6%, and the basketball team only had an 8% increase. And so we can see, obviously, the baseball team is doing much, much better. So now we can look at some tape diagrams to represent increases and decreases. And let's match each situation to one of the diagrams below. And so what I'd like you to do is I'd actually like you guys to pause it and make your first predictions, and then we'll talk about it together. So now that you've paused it, let's go ahead and talk about it together. Lowercase a, compared with last year's strawberry harvest, this year's harvest will have a 25% increase. So that means we're going to start with 100% and now we're going to increase it by 25%. So it has to be more. That means that this would go with uppercase A because this shows this year is more because it extends past the initial 100%. So see how this extends past that initial 100%? It's going to increase. So now let's look at B. This year's blueberries harvest is 75% of last year's. So if we are 75%, that means we did not make up to 100%. So if I took this 25% away from this 100%, I am left with 75%. So then this blueberries harvest is going to be B. Compared with last year, this year's peach harvest decreased by 25%. B is the one that shows things decreasing. Compared with last year, this year's peach harvest is decreasing. And this year's plum harvest is 125% of last year's. That means that I have the initial 100% right here and the 25% right here. And when I put it all together, I get 125% from edge to edge. So then that must be A. So tape diagrams are nice because it lets us see what's really happening in the picture. So how do these tape diagrams relate to the idea of 75% and 125%? Figure A shows that you started with the 100% and you increased it to 25%. And so when you add those together, you get 125%. Where figure B shows that you started with 100% and you decreased it by 25%. And so when you subtract it, that is 75%. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to draw a tape diagram that would explain how 140% and 60%, and then explain that to somebody, how you're using, what is the part that is the same between them. All right. Thank you so much for joining us in this idea of percents of increase and decrease. And I can't wait to see you in our next lesson. Remember to be kind to each other because we all need some extra kindness in our lives. Bye for now.